Hi everyone, it's Ari here, and in case you haven't noticed yet, I'm doing a voiceover for the first time. It's been a long time since I posted anything, and I've been meaning to get back into it, so I thought, why not try something new? I've been thinking about what I want this channel to be like, and while I'm not a professional by any means, this is just my way of doing things, and I like sharing the tips I have. I also think it's really cool to see into the thought process of other artists, and so hopefully you'll find a thing or two to take away from it. This is the piece that I'll be walking through today. I streamed it live, but only saved my recording of the middle section, so we'll go through some of the screenshots I took of the sketch in the earlier stages. So step one is the sketch, and as you can see, aside from the face, I really didn't bother to make anything really clean or detailed, since I know I'd be painting over it anyway. And honestly, most of the time I don't even make the sketch of the face this clean, but I was having fun with it, so why not? Next is a base color for the canvas and blocking in the character while still trying to stay in the same brightness level as the background. Gray colors are really sensitive and just need the tiniest bit of tweaking to suggest color. Because the piece is overall blue, any grays in the blue range will appear as a neutral gray. Moving the slider away from blue will make the gray take on the color of its complement. Notice that the color of the skin is actually pink, but the skin tone appears beige in comparison to the blue grays. In order to make something blue actually appear blue, it needs more saturation. Just remember that color is relative, and I find it easier to think in terms of just warmer versus cooler. For the lighting, I add some subtle gradients and then a bright rim light. I really like using this technique. It's so simple but adds so much to a piece. In this case, it not only does the job of separating the subject from the background, but that high contrast is providing so much visual interest that it's demanding attention as the focal point. You might be wondering, but is that lighting realistic? Would there really be such a strong light in an outdoor dark scene like this? So while in real life, probably not, in art we oftentimes sacrifice some degrees of realism to get a more pleasing visual outcome. I noticed that my personal preference is to create a similar look usually achieved by three-point lighting, which is a technique used in photography, film, and CGI. The key light does the main job creating shadows, a fill light softens these shadows, and the backlight makes the rim effect. Heading back to the drawing now, we finally start getting into actually painting. At this stage, my focus is working more on those finer lights and shadows that help better define shape. When doing this, I always try to think about what the basic 3D shape should be, and then carefully carve them out from the base colors. I also try to use just the right amount of contrast so that these shadows don't alter the overall lighting as a whole. Here's an example of what I didn't want to happen. Notice how if I shade with a color that's too dark, while the forms are still technically accurate, the mood of the piece starts to change into a way I didn't intend. This is all personal preference though, so I'm just going to go back to the way that I liked it. So we've reached the point in the live stream where I stopped the recording because the painting, I wasn't too happy with the face, and I was live and I felt bad redoing it so many times that I was getting frustrated at the piece. I just didn't want to keep filming it anymore. Looking back, it was definitely just being too critical of myself and I should have just taken a break. So that's what I did, and I ended up painting the face on my own time without that pressure. Like, I knew I could do it, but for some reason just not while the camera was recording. The moral of the story is just don't give up. That's why you start to see this little guy show up in the corner of the painting for the rest of the video, just in case you were wondering. But the good news is, from here on out, the video gets a lot more interesting to watch since I have the live recording. So here we are. I stretched the canvas a little bit to be a wider, more cinematic composition, and then I get started on rendering. I approach it by gradually expanding the range of values and colors, but always keeping an eye to the whole. When I start rendering, I almost always use the split screen view, found here in the window menu, so I can always work with control in the zoomed area but not get too caught up in the details. I use a warm tone when transitioning from that bright white into the other colors. I just really like how it makes it feel glowy and the colors look a little bit more interesting with the warm. I spice up the colors in a similar way here by adding cool tones to something that's warm. A little bit goes a long way. If you look at the midtones of the hair, you can see that I'm actually using a variety of colors other than black. This is achieved by doing the same thing, just taking the grays and shifting them slightly. Fast forwarding through some of the work here, I want to get to talking to one of my favorite tricks to use, which is using the lasso tool to define shapes and then filling it in with a brush. You can see me do it on the hair here. It's just a super easy way to add nice, clean edges while also allowing for a lot of shape variation. I just find this easier to do than trying to do the same thing with a brush and pen pressure. I don't have too much more to say about this part. As you can see, I'm just starting to randomly touch up all the different areas, and when I find myself doing this, it's usually a good sign that I'm ready to move on. So I've now been using this wide flat brush. It comes from Kyle's brush set for Photoshop, which is free with an Adobe subscription. There are tons of brushes in this brush pack, so I had to look for a little while before finding this one that I use all the time now. Flat brushes I find are really versatile because you can get a lot of stroke variation out of them depending on what angle that you use them at. You can really see here how I use it both for thick, broad strokes and tiny little details. So I know a lot of people want to know, like, what's the perfect brush? What's the best brush for painting? And in all honesty, it's really what works for you. A good brush is any brush that you know how to use well. If you understand its shape and its color properties, you're so much better able to have the brush do what you want when you want it. In other words, it takes some exploring and good old practice to figure out what you like. I try not to use a ton of different brushes in a single painting since I tend to get a little carried away with it. I find the painting feels more cohesive at the end when there are similar stroke textures used across the whole thing. If I want to add different textures, I save that for the end. It just feels a little bit more deliberate and under control. Another use of the lasso tool that I'm using here is to maintain edges and keep certain shapes clean. By drawing around the area I want to paint in or selecting it with the magic wand tool, I can paint in just the area that I want it. I think I used to use layer masks and maybe would keep things on separate layers, but I found this method to be more efficient. I just try to be more careful about placing the strokes right inside the areas I want them to be the first time, rather than trying to erase it later. So remember how I said back at the sketch process that I didn't draw in the details? Well, sometimes I do need a little bit more guidance to make sure the structure of something is correct and in the right perspective. Then I color in or erase the lines and continue rendering like before. So watching this now, I actually do have a little bit of a critique here, which is that the shadows I'm using are a little too harsh compared to the rest of the lighting. For these metal details, I didn't have to sketch them before painting them since, thanks to the rest of the clothing already being there, I had a pretty good mental image of where they were supposed to go and what angle they should sit at. A tip to make metal surfaces look shiny is to add bands of light and dark contrasting next to each other. These are meant to be reflective and will be more than black and white. They'll reflect some of the colors in the environment. As I start working on areas away from the focal point, you'll notice I deliberately use bigger and maybe even messier strokes. This is important not to draw too much detail in this area so that the attention remains where I want it. So an interesting thing happened here when I was trying to do the same fur on the cape as there is on the hood. It had been a while since I had done that part of the painting. I was looking at the final product, trying to recreate it, but I wasn't able to use the same process to get there. In the end, it doesn't really look the same. I'm also going back on that advice I just gave, and I think I'm making a little too much detail in this area, which is starting to detract from the other parts. I think it would have been better if I had worked on this part at the same time that I was doing the similar textures. You can see here that once I recognized that, I started using broader brush strokes and even blurred the ends of the cape using the motion blur filter. The end result here feels much better. So we've reached the end of where I have live video recording, but I did a couple more touch-ups afterwards. And that is it. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Leave a comment to let me know if this is something you like and maybe something I should do more of. Or even if you have any questions, I can try my best to answer them. And hopefully I'll see you next time.